And you have already heard that ADB is organizing this pre-forum webinar as a lead of one of the stream focusing on the cities, the infrastructure and settlements. So my heartfelt gratitude to ADB team as well for their hard work putting this webinar together and heavy lifting, also designing the sessions for the APAN forum, which is going to be held end of this month. The Asia Pacific Adaptation Forum, considered as the Asia Pacific largest and the longest standing gathering of adaptation practitioners to share information, knowledge, and the best practices in adaptation and the resilience building. As you have already heard, this year's theme of the forum is Resilience for All and enabling the transformative implementation. And I'd like to emphasize the word, the transformative implementation, because we need to work on shifting and scaling up our adaptation actions, that the current actions are inadequate and not matching with the need and the scale of the action that we need. So the Asia Pacific Adaptation, the Secretariat, just for your information, and many of you know, it is hosted within the United Nations Environment Program Regional Office. And as you have heard that I'm basically heading it and supported by a number of my colleagues and also attending this webinar. Now, as we speak about the climate change impacts and the devastation, which are already happening, it is nothing that it is going to come in future. Our communities, the food resources, the ecosystem, everything are facing the challenges arising from the climate change. And also we are seeing the impacts on the livelihood, the ecosystem and ecosystem services, and our homes and the settlement. And therefore, more than ever, this is a time for us to take a careful action on adaptation to address the threat and the vulnerabilities brought by climate change. So outcome of this pre-forum webinars will feed into the overall program of the main forum, as Ardia has mentioned. Furthermore, it aims to foster a mutual understanding and the recommendation for accelerating the transformation towards the climate change resilience. So again, what we are aiming through this webinar is to understand what is happening and what kind of the transformation do we need in the context of the infrastructure, cities, and the settlement. One of the things that I'd like to also highlight when we are talking about the infrastructure, it is not always the infrastructure in the cities, but we also have the infrastructure outside the cities. But we'll be focusing on the cities and infrastructure, giving it more focus and emphasis. But if there is anything that the participant and speaker would like to bring the infrastructure outside the cities, we are happy to hear that. Just for information, participants and colleagues, tomorrow we'll have 2 more webinars on the resilience of communities, and which is going to be organized by United Nations Development Program. And the second one is going to be the resilience of the ecosystem and the ecosystem services, which is going to be organized by IUCN and the UNEP. And would like to welcome you to join also to hear the perspective on the transformative, the action required for the community resilience as well as the resilience of the ecosystem and the ecosystem services. With that, I'd like to thank again the ADB team for heavy lifting and also the participant joining in this forum. And I'm looking forward for a fruitful discussion with you all. Thank you again, and back to you, Ardia.
Thank you, Babu, so much. Before we move forward, a couple of quick housekeeping rules. Please note that the session is being recorded. We kindly request you to turn off your mics and camera unless you're speaking, but please to actively engage by contributing or sharing your views, insights in the chat function through comments or questions. A little bit on the structure of the seminar. The seminar is divided into 3 parts. We will open with a keynote speaker. Then we'll have 2 presentations to help set the scene, raise some issues and challenges that we are facing. And then we'll have a panel discussion to hopefully answer some of these questions. But as Babu mentioned, the main purpose of the webinar is actually to identify the progress that the region is making in the topic of infrastructure, cities and settlements, and how adaptation is being pursued in a transformational context, but also to identify some of the continuing challenges, issues that we've continued to face, because these challenges and issues should be discussed at the main APAN forum in end of the month, and hopefully the forum will be able to provide recommendations on taking forward. I just want to highlight a couple of things. I think Babu very eloquently talked about how APAN has played a very active role in the region for last more than 10 years to help push the adaptation agenda within the community and wider stakeholders that are working on the space. So when adaptation was not really understood, APAN helped us to make a case for adaptation. It showed us how adaptation can be done and scaled up in different contexts. But now, of course, we need to think beyond that and looking at the way the speed and the urgency of climate actions required. This bit of transformational adaptation becomes very, very critical to really shift our systems, address the underlying drivers of vulnerability, and pursue development in a new way, which is more climate responsive. So I request all of you to think from that perspective, how can we pursue transformational adaptation in the context of cities, infrastructure, and settlement? I also want to highlight that while this is the topic of our webinar, there are 3 other streams that mentioned by Babu on food systems, on communities, and on ecosystem-based adaptation. And of course, all these streams need to work together in order to make our wider systems more resilient. So of course, any suggestions, insights from you on how the stream can better connect with some of the other streams would also be very much welcome. So with that, now we will first request our keynote speaker, Dr. Mahesh Rajasekar, who is the Urban Resilience Advisor with the Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, or CDRI, to provide the keynote speech. Dr. Rajasekar has more than 2 decades of extensive experience working in the resilience space, both adaptation and disaster risk management. He has been a pioneer in spearheading many of India's initiatives, including establishment of the Climate Center for Cities, the Climate Alliance, the Hazard Vulnerability Risk Assessment work, end-to-end early warning work, and urban disease surveillance systems in cities in India. So we're delighted to have Dr. Rajasekar with us. And Dr. Rajasekar, if you can hear me, please come ahead and share your thoughts with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Arigya. And ladies and gentlemen, esteemed participants, a warm welcome to all of you, whether you're joining us from the regions with long summer or areas experiencing abundant monsoon this year. Today, I'm greeting you from a city that has recently faced its share of weather challenges. Just a month and a half ago, we endured record-breaking heat waves, and now we are grappling with the aftermath of extreme rainfall and flooding. So these occurrences are not isolated incidences. They are part of a broader trend observed across the Asia-Pacific region over the past century, as highlighted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Rising temperature and temperature extremes have become more prevalent, with a significant decrease in cold days and the increase in warm days. Sadly, this trend shows no sign of abating in the foreseeable future. Simultaneously, the Asian region also experiences erratic precipitation patterns, with some areas witnessing increased rainfall, while others face decreasing trend. The effect of these changes, coupled with non-climatic pressures, are increasingly threatening the fragile coastal and marine systems of Asia. coastal reefs in particular has suffered widespread damages due to high sea surface temperature. And we anticipate further deterioration in the 21st century due to both warming and ocean acidification. Additionally, rising sea levels also pose a significant threat to various ecosystems and also the urban areas which are surrounding it. Intrusion of salt water into coastal freshwater swamps also exacerbate the vulnerability of the fragile ecosystem. Therefore, this forum and also this webinar is very crucial for us to acknowledge that climate change does not act in isolation. It compounds the pressure stemming from rapid urbanization, industrialization, and economic growth. The consequence of these combined stresses will significantly impact the sustainable development prospects of many Asian development countries and cities, putting immense pressure on natural resources and the environment. Moreover, extreme climate events will also take a toll on human health, security, livelihood, affecting different parts of Asia in varying ways. The growing pace of urbanization in the region will also have its due consideration on citizens and infrastructure. As floods and drought become more frequent and intense, poverty, especially as its impact on crops, leading to increased food prices and higher cost of living, will significantly affect urban communities. As we continue our exploration of challenges and opportunities in addressing climate change impacts in Asian cities, we must acknowledge there is a growing recognition of this critical issue amongst different stakeholders. However, mainstreaming climate actions across urban areas is no easy task. Urban areas are complex ecosystems comprising multiple institutions and housing a diverse range of stakeholders. The high population density and interconnectedness of infrastructure pose significant hurdles in implementing transformative changes within short time frames. Achieving consensus on plans and strategies also becomes a challenging issue, given that diversity of stakeholders with varying social, economic, and also educational backgrounds. Despite these challenges, the opportunity to build urban climate resilience today are abundant and crucial. Climate adaptation and mitigation actions, especially in cities focused on infrastructure and communities, are essential for successful global climate change adaptation efforts. Our cities are home to more than half of the world's population, and majority of its built assets and economic activities are impacted by these hazards. To reduce hazard exposure and vulnerability, we must focus on reducing basic service deficit and building resilient infrastructure systems. Investing in urban adaptation not only enhances economic advantages, but also reduces risks to enterprises, households, and communities. Resilient strategy in cities ensure that business continuity exceeds and also safeguards current and future infrastructure investments. According to the recent World Bank report, $1 invested in climate resilience, especially within infrastructure, will provide over $4 of benefit in the long term. Cities such as Chennai, Manila, Jakarta, Bangkok have already developed resilient strategies which address the need for critical infrastructure. As urban development threatens biodiversity, and there is also a parallel session which is going on, I think we must consider ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solutions as a key to urban resilience. Several cities across the world have developed city resilience strategies in the recent past. Seoul from South Korea is a wonderful example. It is a story of how the Cheongchong River, once neglected and polluted, underwent a remarkable restoration, becoming a beacon of hope for sustainable urban development. Decades of urbanization and disregard had taken a toll on the river, leaving the riverbed ravaged and the water quality compromised. It had become a source of concern for public health and a stark reminder of challenges faced by cities. However, Seoul chose not to turn a blind eye to its urban environment. In 2003, they set up an initiative for the river restoration. The project's vision was to breathe life back into the river, to restore its natural beauty, and also to create a oasis amidst the city landscape. The restoration efforts were extensive and comprehensive. Today, the transformed river stands as a testament to the power of sustainable urban planning. It offers walking paths, parks, and public spaces, for people to meet. And also the restoration has not only improved the river's aesthetics, but also served as a vital tool in combating urban heat. There is a 4-degree reduction in the temperature surrounding the river. The impact of this is not only the environmental benefit. The restored riverfront has also become a focal point for community engagement, bringing people together and fostering a sense of belonging. I think similar nature-based solutions and river or water body restorations are being taken by several cities in the Asia region. The Namami Gange initiative in India, the Living Seawall and Kelp Forest in Sydney, the Marina Barrage. I think I saw a picture of that in the opening slide in Singapore, is also a reminder that cities can transform, cities can change. And city-based disaster risk management plans with emphasis on risk reduction can not only protect the lives and livelihood of poor and vulnerable, but they can also help manage climate change adaptation and sustainable development policies. The recent midterm review of SDG by UNDRR indicates that majority of the countries, especially those countries which are in Asia, are lagging behind in their Sendai framework of disaster risk reduction and also the SDG goals. Thankfully, technological advancement provide us with valuable tools. Data collection, both from the ground, air, and also space, has improved significantly in the recent past. Enhanced risk models and increased scientific understanding of urban spaces empower us to develop innovative technical solutions, particularly in water and energy management. There are also cities such as Tokyo, Bangalore, Hong Kong, Taipei, Dubai are leading these technological advances. While some of the cities have successfully navigated these challenges, many others face obstacles due to lack of technical expertise and resources. As we move forward, it is crucial for us to reevaluate our approaches to urbanization and resilience. Systemic and systematic thinking holds the key to developing effective urban plans that can withstand the impact of weather today and climate tomorrow. We must adopt a holistic approach that considers the interconnection between various components of cities' ecosystem. By doing so, we can create sustainable urban environment that are resilient to future challenges. However, the question remains, how do cities augment their financial capacity, particularly for climate adaptation? Investing in climate resilience requires significant resources, and it is essential for cities to explore innovative financing mechanisms, public-private partnerships, and international collaborations to secure the necessary funds and also to learn from each other. Another vital aspect is making early warning systems accessible to all. Timely information is critical for preparedness and response during extreme events. But beyond that, we must also focus on developing customized warnings that cater to the need of infrastructure managers and operators. Currently, there are no specific warnings which exist. How a dam manager will operate the dam in case of impending extreme rainfall. We don't know how metro or rail operators will work in case of an extreme heat solutions. By providing tailored information, we can enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of response measure. Additionally, we must ensure the risk data is available and accessible to all stakeholders. This includes not only country governments, but also private companies and individual citizens. Armed with comprehensive risk information, all investments which we are making in urban areas today can be made or can be informed through reducing vulnerability and also enhancing the resilience of the cities. Promoting green and blue infrastructure alongside traditional grey infrastructure is another vital component of building resilient cities. Nature-based solutions such as green spaces and water management systems can complement traditional infrastructure, providing multiple benefits, including flood mitigation, improved air quality, and enhanced biodiversity. Lastly, we must design today's infrastructure and also inform investments to withstand the future climate extremes we are likely to face. This calls for forward thinking and integrating climate projections into our infrastructure planning and development. By doing so, we can future-proof our cities and protect the well-being of our citizens. As we continue this crucial dialogue, let us remember that building resilient cities is a shared responsibility. It requires collaboration between governments, private sector, academia, and civil society. We currently stand at a pivotal moment where concerted efforts and collaborative action can shape the future of our cities and their ability to thrive in the face of climate challenges. By embracing the opportunities and tackling the challenges head-on, we can pave the way for a sustainable and resilient urban landscape that benefits us and the generations to come. I would like to thank ADB for providing us with the opportunity and all the participants for their attention and commitment to this critical issue. I would also like to thank the organizer for giving CDRI this opportunity to deliberate at this particular event. Thank you very much. Over to you, Aringa.
Thank you, Dr. Abhisekar, so much for sharing your insights and really helping us remind that climate change does not act in isolation. It is unfolding with other global trends such as urbanization. However, there are many opportunities in the context of the urban development which can help us promote forward-looking climate actions, be it through ecosystem-based measures, through very tailored early warning systems or financial products or use of technology. We, of course, look forward very much to work closely with CDRI and see how CDRI can help us take the transformational adaptation work way forward in the region. So thank you for that. Now I will move on and I'll request my colleague, Dr. Natasha Korokpu, who's a climate change specialist at ADB, to provide a brief presentation looking at the resilience outlook for cities, infrastructure, and settlement. Natasha, over to you, please.
Great. Thanks, Argo, for the introduction, and warm greetings to all our participants joining from across the Asia-Pacific region and wider. So my presentation aims to provide a quick snapshot of the key trends in or advances in transformational adaptation as it relates to city settlements and infrastructure. It's part of a wider publication produced by APAN called Resilience Outlook, and these are some of the preliminary findings from our report, and we hope to have this report finalized by end of August, but would be wonderful to hear the thoughts of our participants on these early findings as well. So in terms of some of the critical advances that have been made, this, of course, climate change planning that is happening at the national level through the production of national adaptation plans. We've got health adaptation plans in some countries, and these are critical, right? Because they link with the national determined contributions. But at the same time, they lack the investment frameworks that are needed to translate these plans into actions through sustained finance mechanisms. And I think this is vital, given that there's many plans out there, but including a buffet of adaptation actions for urban and settlements, but they lack the finance mechanisms to operationalize those actions. Secondly, there's increased investments, of course, being made in physical infrastructure in the region, and there is some consideration of climate change in that space. And this has been largely spurred by the post-COVID recovery efforts, where there's an emphasis on green and disaster risk and climate change reduction efforts. There's also a trend towards the use and integration of big data and open source data for making decisions related to adaptation planning. And this is vital in terms of making timely and transformational adaptation actions. Climate change risks information is more accessible now to decision makers at different levels of government, but how that translates into decision making at the provincial or even the local government level is still uncertain. There's a greater understanding of the significance and the role of nature-based solutions for resilience building of both the human and natural systems. And we heard from Dr. Uma about the various and exciting nature-based solutions that are being adopted by various cities across the world. There's also increased engagement with the private sector, including communities, and these initiatives aim to build resilience. I've been working a lot with SMEs, and it's great that there's this increased engagement and new partnerships forming between governments and private sector and communities as well. There's also quite a big push towards gender mainstreaming across this space in terms of transformational adaptation, but there's limited consideration of these intersectionality issues and inclusive approaches that really addresses deeper structural barriers and power inequalities that are required if you're going to ensure transformational adaptation, particularly for informal and marginalized communities who are the most vulnerable to climate risks. Next slide, please. So I'll now briefly touch on some of the challenges and opportunities in terms of transformational adaptation as it cuts across some of the enablers of transformational adaptation. And the first one we're looking at is policy and governance. But as an opening remark, I would like to say that our region is quite diverse, and some of these challenges will be different in various contexts, right? Because there's differential climate vulnerability, adaptive capacity, and resilience across our region. So in terms of policy and governance, there's improved policies required that link rural and urban planning processes that address migration issues. The link is not so clear, but issues around rural resilience is often overlooked in terms of integrated approaches. So I would suggest greater need for more systems approaches in terms of urban adaptation planning that integrates rural and semi or peri-rural, peri-urban issues. There's limited investments and policies to support resilience building of informal workers, migrants and refugees. And this is across most of the literature that I've read. And these informal communities are huge, right, in the Pacific and also in the Asian megacities. Limited efforts to strengthen policies to support climate resilience building of local and provincial government is another challenge. And there's a lack of policies and governance mechanisms to build climate resilience of informal settlements in general. And they also lack the access to social protection measures by the most vulnerable communities. Next slide, please. In terms of planning and programming, there's been limited investments that take systems approaches, and I touched on that before as well, and look at co-benefits to other sectors and systems. And most of the investments are largely asset focused. I mean, for example, I work in health and very much focused on health system strengthening, but often overlooked co-benefits to water and agricultural systems or even transport systems. So there needs to be more integrated and holistic approaches to planning and programming. Building codes and standards remain outdated in general, and they fail to account for climate change. There's land use planning in general fail to also integrate climate change risks, and they also seldom take integrated planning approaches. So these are very much interrelated. In general, there's been underinvestments in health systems resilience building, and that's quite general across our region, and this is particularly in relation to early warning systems. We've got increased vector-borne diseases and climate-sensitive diseases in our region. There's very little I can see of heat wave planning efforts across our region. We are seeing kind of these trends in morbidity and high vulnerabilities across our region due to heat waves. And then there's also the adaptive capacity needs of communities must also be strengthened in general across informal settlements. Thank you. So next slide. In terms of science and assessments, there's limited integration of interventions that are co-produced by engaging diverse stakeholders. There's a greater need to mobilize communities and other actors who may be not necessarily engaged in formal adaptation processes, and that's a trend we're seeing across our region. There's increased recognition of the role of Indigenous knowledge and local knowledge systems for both bottom-up approaches in terms of climate risk assessments, but also decision-making tools to inform urban planning efforts. There's limited focus in general on long-term planning due to the integration of scenarios that have a level of uncertainty. And in terms of technologies and practices, there's underinvestments in nature-based solutions and better understanding on the impacts of nature-based solutions in reducing climate risks in various urban and rural contexts. In general, there's opportunities to expand urban farming that's often overlooked, particularly amongst informal settlements, but also the wider urban system. Food security is, of course, a huge issue, and there's another stream on food systems, but this is an area that is often there's very limited investment in this space, but there's also many co-benefits, right, for health and other, and also nature in terms of urban food system growth. Adaptive management as practice is not fully institutionalized in infrastructure programming in general. So in terms of social learning from those adaptation interventions, looking at diversity in those adaptation interventions, these kind of approaches are still very embryonic in this space in terms of city settlements and infrastructure. Next slide, please. Touching on the last slide, in terms of finance and investment, there has been a general trend towards increased climate finance, and this is due to increased commitments from financial institutions, example, MDBs and other donors, such as the Green Climate Fund, etc. There's new and innovative mechanisms to mobilizing this climate finance, and we are seeing that across our regions, such as the resilience bonds through IIBB, and then the Fiji government blue bonds as well. There's limited funding for nature-based solutions in general. And as I mentioned before, it's very project focused rather than process focused, which I mentioned, we need more systems approaches to addressing climate adaptation. In general, there's limited financing coming from the private sector. Networks and partnerships and business models are required that spur on scale up adaptation actions at greater, I guess, trends than that we are seeing right now. Insurance can play an important role in this place as well within the suite of financial risk management products, but increasingly they are unaffordable due to increasing climate risks. So for example, there may be products out there, but for example, small, medium enterprises cannot access these products, or even people living in informal settlements cannot access such products. So these are some of the general trends, and I will leave it there for now, but be curious and keen to hear from our audience later in the Q&A session. Thank you. I'll go over to you.
Thank you, Natasha, so much for sharing the progress, the challenges and barriers. Next slide, please. I also encourage colleagues to please provide your inputs in the chat button. We're already seeing some couple of exciting questions being posed. So I will request the panelists to start looking at the questions so that you're able to respond it during your session. Now we will dive into two very specific presentations. Next slide, sorry. One focusing on Pacific and infrastructure resilience, and our second one focusing more on the urban and use of risk information. We have two speakers, my colleague Christina Chung. She works as a climate change specialist in ADB's Pacific department. Christina has more than 10 years of experience of working in built environment and climate actions, including with the private sector. And the second speaker is Dr. Van Doorn, who is from the World Climate Research Program. Dr. Van Doorn is a climate scientist at the University of Tsukuba in Japan, and has been leading some of the work related to climate risk assessments. So maybe I'm going to request Christina to first come in. Christina, you've got about approximately 10 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Argo, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name, as introduced, is Christina Chung, and I work with the Pacific Department in ADB. So I'm very happy to be here to share a few project examples to just discuss how we are approaching the work of building resilience in the countries where we are working. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when we think of the Pacific, maybe we can go back to the previous slide quickly. Right, this is the map, right, of the Pacific Ocean, and when we think of the Pacific, we would think of tiny land masses spread over a huge ocean expanse, and that is, it speaks to the remoteness and also the large distances that any physical commodity would have to pass through to get to the communities that we're talking about. And next slide. On top of these challenges that they are already facing, climate change also introduces new pressures on Pacific Island states. And of course, conditions are different from country to country, and the hazards that they're facing also differs quite significantly. But in general, we are looking at issues around sea level rise, storm surge, and cyclones, resulting in issues such as coastal inundation, loss of land, damage to buildings and infrastructure, and in many cases, loss of lives and livelihoods. Right. So of course, we are working with member countries in this region to try to build resilience such that we can address the pressures that climate change is imposing on their cities, their livelihoods, and also their development prospects. Right. Next slide. Yeah. So we're going to touch on two projects very briefly, just so that we can have a quick discussion at the end of this session around how the different approaches to address different challenges that are faced. Okay, so the first project is in Vanuatu. Next slide, please. And this is based in Port Vila. So this project comes as a follow-on from an earlier technical assistance from the ADB. And the earlier technical assistance did a very comprehensive assessment of the challenges facing the city, Port Vila, to enhancing its resilience and also to enhancing its development prospects. So to give some context to this project, Vanuatu has been ranked #1 country at risk of disasters due to natural hazards globally, right? And it has retained this ranking of #1 for numerous years. And this is due to a combination of the frequency of natural hazards occurring in the country, but also due partly into the fact of inadequate infrastructure and also the limited institutional capacity of the government and local organizations to cope with such such events. So the country is currently 80% rural, but rapidly urbanizing. And the capital city has a population density of 3,400 people per square meters. That is higher than the population density of Los Angeles, just for comparison, right? So existing challenges of poorly planned urbanization, inadequate infrastructure is compounded by these frequent flooding and storms and inundation and sometimes earthquakes that are occurring and affecting the communities there. So each time a disaster happens or hazard occurs, people, whether it affects Port Vila or not, people in the outer islands who are affected will move towards the capital city, either to seek shelter with their families or to access government support or other services that they can only find in the city, such as healthcare or finance, banking services. So in such situation, we do see that the importance of temporary emergency shelters is very much needed. However, the study has also found that existing shelters are very inadequate. Next slide, please. So this project tries to address the different gaps that have been identified in a comprehensive way. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the project has multiple components addressing strengthening urban planning and urban management capacities, but across different levels of government. So they will be working with the national government, but also at the city level, so that there is consistency in the capacity enhancement, but also in the systems that are established. The project will also build local partnerships and networks to build capacity and also to enhance the emergency response and planning. And then the infrastructure component would be to construct emergency shelters, learning from lessons that have been picked up in the assessment exercise before the project started. So some of the aspects of how we are going to make these emergency shelters climate resilient, but also fit for purpose would be number one, ensuring that the buildings are flexible, adaptable, and economically viable when they are not being used as shelters. Okay, and also to ensure that when they are being used as shelters, these buildings are inclusive and also speaks to the needs of people who are sheltering there, including their need to engage in economic activities, even when awaiting the reconstruction of their homes. Okay, and one of the challenges this project is facing now is the identification of a suitable site for the two shelters. And this really highlights the big demand and competition for land and space within the Port Vila urban area. And so the different groups that are being consulted and different priorities and perspectives need to be balanced and weighed out. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I also want to discuss another project that we are working on. So this South Tarawa Renewable Energy Project is trying to marry both climate change mitigation with climate change adaptation. And Kiribati is a country where electricity generation relies very heavily on imported diesel fuel. And this then makes the country susceptible to global supply chain disruptions for reasons completely out of their control, right? And as an atoll country, Kiribati is considered, all the land area in Kiribati is considered coastal land, and it's all prone to flooding. And also with the growing population in Tarawa, the capital city, there is also now a very high demand, high strong competition for very limited and shrinking land. Next slide, please. So what we're trying to do is to then introducing floating solar PV system, moving the electricity generation to the waters instead of keeping it on land. And this reduces the dependence or the strain on limited land resources. It also comes with adaptive, low carbon, productive use of energy. And this component in the project is it open to many different opportunities for the use of energy to enhance the quality of life for people in Kiribati. However, one of the challenges that was encountered really was to engage different sectors to talk about, say, agriculture or aquaculture, the use of electricity to introduce such industries in Tarawa. And because this project is seen very largely as an energy project, so there was very strong challenges in engaging stakeholders in different sectors. So next slide, please. So in closing, I would just really like to leave you with two questions to digest over. And one is really that with such limited project resources and such immense needs, how are we best able to leverage synergies either between projects, between organizations, between regions or countries in the regions, to leverage synergies and efficiencies so that we can optimize benefits to the communities we're working with. And also, as climate change adaptation is necessarily a cross-sectoral endeavor, how can we design projects that are able to engage stakeholders from different sectors to address challenges together? So with that, I want to end the presentation and hand back to Argo.
Thank you, Christina, so much for sharing very concrete examples of what adaptation projects look like in the Pacific countries, and also raising some of the important questions regarding financing, partnerships, that will be critical if you really want to move towards a transformational direction. So thanks for that. I do encourage colleagues and panelists to look at the chat box and see what questions are coming. And meanwhile, I'll request Dr. Quang Van Duan to make his presentation. You have 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. It's my honor and pleasure to be here and present about our research initiative, Asian Urban Climate Research Network, that we are attempt to organize and do together and work together under the sponsor of My Climate Risk initiative of the WRCP of WMO. Next, please. So first of all, let me introduce very shortly about myself. My name is Quang Van Duan. I'm a assistant professor and head of atmospheric informative modeling lab, a center for computational University of Tsukuba, Japan. Next, please. So our work is almost about modeling. We are using they discovered the novel method using big data and AI and the technology, as well as the numerical modeling and supercomputer to predict the future, extreme weather and climate, focus on the cities. Next, please. So what is about Asian Urban Climate Research Network is we are now here to do the risk assessment, which is with the main purpose to serve decision maker. So this initiative is including three parts. One is under My Climate Risk of the WRCP, WMO in Japan hub. That's I'm a representative and coordinator of this. And the second is this code codex is also the different initiative of the WRCP, which focus on produce the climate change information, high resolution climate change information. And we established the Urban Climate Initiative because to do urban climate, we need very high resolution. Now we know that the climate prediction is on 100 or several kilometer results. We need to more data, more finer resolution for city climate risk assessment. The third one is also different initiative that belong to European Codex. That's the initiative to find a way to figure out the protocol of that regarding to how to predict the future. Okay, next please. So regarding our Asian Urban Climate Initiative, we have partner in most in Japan, China, Southeast Asia, India, and Saudi Arabia, and some partner from other outside region in Europe and USA and Australia. But our most concern is the urban climate in climate change and climate risk in Southeast Asia country. Partly that's because I'm I'm Vietnamese and I've come from the region, but we also focus to produce a method that can apply applicable for the region. So next, please. So now let me go through about what we are doing now. Next, please. So it is not need to explain more you why we have to focus on city, because cities hold more than 50% of global population, but they generating more than 80% of global GDP, and also account for 70% of global CO2 emission. So such all, because city is very important for our life, our community. So we need to focus how to predict future city climate. And these are our the responsibilities. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, please. Yep, and there is a lot of climate risk. That's I don't think that I need to explain it, because you're here or know more than me. That's the rising temperature lead the change in health and in diseases. Those pressure on healthcare costs. And also the well-known rising sea level, extreme weather event, and climate change attacks infrastructures, and also air pressure on our maintenance costs. And also the such thing can modify our insurance industry, and also can alternate how we using energy in the future. Next, please. So to deal with climate risk, because we know risk is a function of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. So first we need to identify the hazards first. This they call this new normal of climate hazards under new climate, under global warming. So in this case, we need very high resolution future climate data. Thus, we have not until now, and the data should be reliable enough so that the decision can base on it. From the data, from climate data scientists, we are really on time adopt about what we produce, I mean the data. So the big question in the academic field is what we provide, the data, the information for final decision is really trustful or not, is the big question in our areas. We have responsibility to provide reliable data. And we need also not the data with distilled knowledge wisdom that's accessible and easy to understand and translate to action from data, and delivery via a framework that engaging a stakeholder with action commitment. This is what we are doing now. Next, please. So this international research framework, we try to answer this question first, as how to predict the future climate hazard, how to develop the tool using computer or using to generate the information, and how to communicate such information for other stakeholders, for policymakers. And one more very important question that our network, we try to do is to have to build a capacity of regions, young scientists. Here, I will show you later about what we do for some Southeast Asia mega cities, is because everybody knows that climate change is very complicated research field. So it's not is for some small country and city is not easy to predict future by themselves. So it is induced the injustice in climate sense. And final question is we try to build a climate wisdom toward sustainability and resilience. Next, please. And here I will not talk more. That's we show some technology we developed in our university together with USA and European college, and also and to try to transfer it to our college in Southeast Asia region. Next, please. This example what we do to have to give you a sense of what is data, what is the climate data is we focus this figure show you some land use data for let's say some Asian capital cities. Here you can see very big city like Bangkok or Jakarta. But some place like in East Timor, like the city Dili, East Timor, very small and usually ignored in any climate prediction. And also this is related with what we try to feel is about climate injustice. And we have to do something with to help the local scientists to do predicts by themselves. Next, please. What is show the same. That's through the research we can produce the data. We also can build the knowledge how the city will face the both threat of urbanization that's induced urban heat island intensification and also global warming. Also, we can predict the future change in extreme precipitation in the region. Next, please. So in this last slide, so I just summarize some challenges that we are really feeling now. We feel this first of all this lack of integrated in international framework for urban climate risk assessment. That including the climate scientists, socioeconomic policymakers, and stakeholders. Actually, our group is one of the first and broad that include the broad range of country diversity, but we have the different challenges. Us is how to, because it's very we are in academic field with limited resource and it's very difficult to build the strong community to maintain or to continue the research for long and to have some useful product for the societies. So the second change is is the one inadequate in climate capacity. That's what we try to do to fill the gap now, and also that's many people have want to address is we need a framework of international and local government to encourage the using the climate risk information in the future social and economic planning. Thank you very much. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Dewan, so much for sharing your examples of your great work you guys are doing. But I think more importantly, highlighting that how increasingly we realize that climate risk assessment requires a very much an integrated and multi-stakeholder approach. And it's just not about having the climate scientists in the room, but equally about having the various other stakeholders who potentially will be using the information in the process itself. So thanks for that. Now we will move on to a third section of our webinar, which is the panel discussion. I'm very happy to have with us three excellent colleagues who have agreed to be on the panel. The first of all, Dr. Bapon Fakhruddin, who's a senior water resources management specialist with the Green Climate Fund. Second, we're delighted to have Mr. Kemson Taude, who is the climate diplomacy coordinator, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Vanuatu. And last but not the least, we have Ms. Fatma Ben Fadl, who's a senior program officer for business and finance with IUCN. Maybe you can put on your cameras and, okay, thank you. Great. So I will start with one common question to all three of you. Recognizing the topic of today's discussion is transformational adaptation in the context of cities, infrastructure, and settlements. What would an example of a transformational adaptation be in your work area? Who would like to go first?
Well, I could go first if you want.
Go ahead, Babu, please, go ahead.
Thank you so much for organizing such an interesting and also important webinar. As a GCF, you may be so far actually by last 7 years, we almost spent around $1 billion into this particular topics on looking at cities, building and urban investment, and crossing over around the 84 countries around the globes. And when you're looking at this kind of transformative adaptation, is not just only about the increasing the robustness of our physical structure, but actually how fundamentally we actually able to link up with our societal systems. So just for an example, if we just give here is like, the concept of living with floods in Bangladesh or living with water in Netherlands, those are some of the good example how actually it brings to the community to more transformational changes and transformational adaptive management for climate change. There are several examples of GCF project in the urban space you may see where actually you can look at more on the interconnectivity between the cities, settlement and infrastructure, as well as how actually you can a little bit avert the maladaptation that are actually, sometimes we think those are actually adaptation practice, but later on you can find those are actually not quite good solution. One of the example maybe I can just give, like in Senegal, where you maybe know that the Dakar city, which is actually quite highly prone to pluvial flooding, and that's maybe one of the biggest challenge for urban environment due to the poor drainage mechanism or having those kind of surprising heavy precipitation, which is, we are seeing that 1 in 1,000 years or 1 in 10,000 years event is actually occurring into the urban environment, and none of our infrastructure is actually quite ready to cope up with such kind of system, such kind of event, and that creating either flooding, erosion, landslip, and a lot of severe activity. So two aspects need to be looked at here actually. One is actually you look at actually your infrastructure resilience, which is your hard part of it, how you enhance your utility services, horizontal infrastructure, your buildings or critical infrastructure, but also other side is a soft side of it actually, how you ensure such some of the example that other speaker gave, like in early warning systems. It's not only for actually providing a warning for an event, but how you ensure the national government plus city governance able to adapt a sort of like a risk-based decision-making culture, which is still not in our society. So once you're able to adapt those kind of risk-based decisions about system or risk-based decision-making process, and that reflect your national adaptation plan or even your policy and framework, that could actually enhance a lot of your interconnectivity. And looking at one of the question actually raised by one of the audience, the Peter King, about should we actually look at the plan B? I don't think so. No, we don't need to look at actually the plan B. Rather, actually, we need to think about doing things differently because we often actually doesn't want to come back from our traditional system, or we often actually look at our silo environments. We don't want to break through the connectedness, engagement, as well as interlinkage, which Babu also quite heavily mentioned in his speaking. So we need to look at those kind of perspectives. Singapore could be one of the good example. Again, I can say that where actually you can see that actually the transformed utilities as well as canals and vibrant, how they can actually make together to making it more aesthetic side of it, but also it actually using for their proper drainage as well as water utility services. So I think that's maybe from my side. I maybe just keep the other panel speaker to provide some examples. Thanks, Alko.
Thanks, Bapon. Fatma, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you very much, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be with you this very interesting webinar. I'm going to contribute from IUCN side. We've been looking into urban matters and mainstreaming NBS for a few years now, and we've achieved a few results in that sense. So just as a reminder of the context we work with, we currently have about $133 billion channeled into nature-based solutions. And we estimate that nature-based solution investments must triple by 2030, so within the next 6 years or so, in order to meet the climate, nature, and land neutrality targets. IUCN, as you know, has pioneered the concept of nature-based solutions 20 years ago, and it has developed the first formal definition. And the global standard for nature-based solution was established by IUCN as a safeguard for their use. Nature-based solutions have significant but currently underutilized potential to help address global challenges, as panelists have said before me. And IUCN has developed some tools and on-the-ground support to help governments, communities, businesses, and NGOs implement effective nature-based solutions that are ambitious, safe, sustainable, and that benefit people and the planet. Building on the IUCN global standard for nature-based solution and its early applications, IUCN also offers stakeholders from all sectors the opportunity to earn a professional certificate on NBS through the IUCN Academy. IUCN teams have also worked with countries to influence and include nature-based solutions as part of their national climate action plans, the NDCs, and they made them part of the national adaptation plans. And we're seeing an increasing number of countries, including NBS, in their NDCs and NAPs. IUCN recently has established the Urban Nature Index that you might be familiar with, but if not, it's a very interesting methodology with 30 indicators nested across 60 themes. And they were developed to help cities understand their impacts on nature, set science-based targets for improvement, and monitor progress accordingly. By giving the spotlight to ecological performance of cities, the framework serves to enhance environmental transparency and accountability and to facilitate goal setting and catalyze conservation action. To illustrate this work, I'm going to use 3 examples. One example is an urban planning tool that we've been implementing with the European Union. Another example is, I thought would be interesting for the audience here, is a project focused on rural areas, but that has indirect benefits for urban climate resilience. And the third example illustrates the work we do with our private sector partners to help them mainstream NBS in their business operations, but also to make them active economic actors in the NBS, on the NBS scene. So the first example is Grow Green project that you might be familiar with. It's funded through the European Union Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program. And it's been implemented by IUCN in a number of countries. And I'm going to give you an overview of this project globally, but with a focus on China, in Beijing. So the Grow Green project aims at embedding NBS in the long-term planning, development, operation, and management of cities in a variety of countries. The project outputs aim at promoting adapted policies, business involvement, and general public involvement in Europe, Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and should help advance the demand for NBS products and services. So we at IUCN have worked on integrating NBS with the city of Beijing. And we have had a number of demonstration projects and partnerships that helped create urban parks and green spaces, including rooftop gardens to improve urban biodiversity and reduce urban heat island effects, introducing permeable pavement and green stormwater infrastructure to manage rainwater and reduce the risk of flooding during heavy rainfall events, and integrating green corridors and ecological networks to promote biodiversity connectivity and enhance the overall resilience of the city's ecosystem. Some of the NBS approaches that were tested in these programs we're still working on summarizing the results, but it's one of the first initiatives that was tested in Asia for NBS mainstreaming in urban areas in an Asian country. Another example, which is also very, very interesting to talk about, is an IUCN initiative funded by the GCF in Sri Lanka, which is aimed at rural areas. It's called Strengthening Climate Resilience of Subsistence Farmers and Agricultural Plantation Communities residing in the vulnerable river basins, watershed areas, and downstream of the Knuckles Mountain Range catchment of Sri Lanka. For those of you who are familiar with the Knuckles Mountain Range, it's located in the districts of Matale and Kandy. So this project, even though it's aimed at urban areas, it promotes some specific NBS approaches, ecosystem-based adaptation, agroforestry and sustainable farming practices, water resource management, green infrastructure, eco-friendly livelihood, biodiversity conservation, capacity building and awareness by providing training and education to communities and stakeholders about NBS approaches, and promoting the engagement of local communities in planning and decision-making process of NBS initiatives. The indirect effect of this rural program on cities is that by implementing nature-based solutions in the river basins and watershed areas, the project will help reduce the risk of flooding and enhance water management practices, improved water retention and reduced soil erosion, which can lead to more stable water flows downstreams, benefiting urban areas that often face flooding and water scarcity issues. The same with the improvement of water quality, which will provide cleaner water that lead to improved water supply for urban residents and reduced costs associated with water treatment. And so on and so forth. Many examples of how rural-based NBS initiatives have urban co-benefits. One last example, and I will stop there, is work that we are doing with our private sector partners. We have a large network of corporations that we work with to influence their business operation and mainstream nature aspects to reduce the harmful impact of their operations on natural habitat of endangered species and so on. But we also work with companies to make them an active economic actors in green urban planning. And one example is work that we're doing with a major Hong Kong-based company, which is very present in urban planning through real estate investments and restaurant, hotels, and so on. And what we've been doing with them is developing a program for Hong Kong and a city in Indonesia to create green corridors, to use the urban nature index that I described before and try to create some reference studies in these cities and to influence the planning at the municipality level. and establishing parks, green spaces, and urban forests with them through the development of their business operations. So I'll stop here. I've prepared some notes on the financial mechanisms we use, but I think they've already been covered by other colleagues, but happy to describe those as well if you're interested. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for sharing very concrete examples, which actually addresses many of the questions around urban farming, around how do you engage private sector in NBS, as well as how do you make the case fence and NBS, which was there in the question answer chat box. Thanks for that. Let me now move to Kemson from Vanuatu. Kemson, so what does transformational adaptation mean in the context of Vanuatu? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Roy. I am Kemson Tavde from Vanuatu, and I firstly have to say that Vanuatu is one of the most vulnerable nations in the South Pacific. Others include droughts, floods, extreme temperatures, changing weather patterns, earthquakes, tsunamis, high intensified tropical cyclones, and heat waves. Our leaders have repeatedly declared that climate change is the single greatest threat to our very own existence and livelihood. Climate change will worsen a number of the existing climate-related risks and introduce new assets to Vanuatu and other countries in the Pacific. For instance, within a decade, we are faced with 2 Category 5 cyclones that have caused a lot of devastation in our city here, Port Vila, and also Santo in the Luganville in Santo. And just this year we have 2 twin cyclone with the Category 4 twin cyclone in March, and these cyclones followed by a lot of heavy rain caused a huge devastation to our infrastructure in Port Vila. So I listened to the presenters, and I must say that I'm quite agree with the report from the presentation from Natasha and Christina. And back to the question, the first question, I would give some examples of innovative solutions that are currently implemented as the result of some of the assessments that have been made. Firstly, we are using the traditional knowledge in the design of word-implemented adaptation strategies, such as backyard gardens or backyard gardening and home tilapia fish ponds. Chiefs and traditional elders are part of governance arrangements to ensure fit within culture and custom of different islands. As you know, we have around 83 islands that are very diverse in culture. So to make sure that all the chiefs that are living here in the Port Vila, they work together to as part of the stakeholders to discuss on the innovative solutions. Okay, we also have increased investment of particular vulnerability hotspots. For example, the ADB Irish funded construction of multi-purpose adaptation, evacuation centers where marginalized and poor communities have access to basic services such as showers, lighting, storage for community assets, and meeting venues. As we are vulnerable to cyclones, I think evacuation centers are important, as highlighted by Christina. Now, I know that there's challenge to locate the suitable location to build those evacuation centers, but these infrastructures that we need them the most. We also have the implementation of urban drainage to reduce localized flooding in identified zones, including the use of reforestation and clean water sinks. So basically, these are some of the examples that I can contribute to in our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kemson, for sharing very concrete, practical examples from Vanu. That's very useful for us. So we are almost coming to an end of the webinar timing. There are a few questions related to adaptation investment frameworks, and I will request the colleague to reach out to Christina directly because she is leading some work on such topic in the Pacific. The questions around loss and damage, which has been addressed, and a whole bunch of questions around NBS, which Fatima has kindly addressed it. Before I end, let me just turn on to the panelists. If in 1 second, do you want to give your main takeaway point for how do you scale up transformational adaptation? Bapun, do you want to start? Very briefly.
Sure. I think one of the things is quite important to looking at climate financing, which has been quite heavily also raised in this particular discussion, but how actually we create an enabling environment to provide various type of instruments. So GCF could be one of the example where you can actually have all sort of financial instruments are available to access either bond, grant, loan, concessional loan, equity, or guarantor, or insurance. So how actually we can actually promote this kind of tools with whatever actually required for the urban development point of view or city resilience point of view, and how actually we can bring this private and public sector together as a blended financing approach. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bapun. So make use of the maximum use of the range of financial instruments available to promote transformational adaptation. Christina, from your point of view, any one last point, how do we scale up transformational adaptation?
I think, thanks, Ergo. I think in the context of the Pacific, I have to echo what Kemson was highlighting, the importance of recognizing different forms of knowledge and to try to work together and think in different ways, new ways and old ways, and to work together to define a new livable future. Thanks.
Thank you. Using different types of knowledge. Dr. Doan, from your side, 1 point.
Sorry, for my side, so yep, I'm thinking more about the scientific building capacity in actually for me to fill the gap. That's the local climate. Scientists cannot predict the climate change or the climate hazard by themselves. We need this framework to support the technology transferring in terms of scientific prediction, climate prediction terms. That's I really this is my suggestion, comment.
Thank you. So building capacity and technology transfer. Kemson, one last point from your side.
Well, that it would be based, focus on the infrastructure. I think we need the quality infrastructure. When I say this, I can refer to the roads, the proper drainage, the quality of the buildings of, the residential building or the business buildings. We need resistant infrastructure that can resist against severe cyclones that we are currently facing, especially in the context of Vanuatu. Thank you.
Great. So infrastructure that's informed by climate risk, understanding of it. Last but not the least, Fatima, from your side, one last point.
On our side at IUCN, I think we are on the same. We think a lot. Like Mr. Fakhruddin from the GCF said, it's really to shift from gray to green infrastructure, we need innovative finance. At IUCN, we look for partners in both the public and private sector to test innovative financial instruments, innovative green bonds that look at the aggregation of NBS projects in different sectors. We also use the IUCN tools such as the Green List to identify projects that have an economic return on investment, and at the same time benefit the environment and livelihoods. So it's really very much about changing mindsets through innovative economic tools.
Thank you. That's great. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. Couple of points that comes to my mind and what I heard from all of you is if you really want to promote transformational adaptation for cities, infrastructure, and settlements, the need for forward thinking, the need for moving away from business as usual, the need for addressing structural barriers, need for identifying solutions which produces core benefits, whether it's mitigation or health or other core benefits, and of course, a need for integrated solutions. I also heard that there are many opportunities. For example, cities provide one opportunities. There are many good examples. One is NBS itself is a great example of transformational solutions and the great opportunity that financing is providing by a range of instruments that's already available to us, and we should make use of it more and more. This provides a great feedback to all of us to feed into the main discussion during the APAN forum on the stream on cities, infrastructure, and settlements. Please do participate at the forum if possible, and definitely do participate at the webinar tomorrow for the other two streams. So with that, I'm going to end the webinar. I want to just check, Babu, is there any announcement from your side before we close?
No, thank you very much, Orgia, for running and moderating the session and mentioning that we have two more pre-forum webinars tomorrow. And I welcome all the participants to join. Thank you, Orgia, once again.
Thank you, Babu, and thank you all for joining. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.